very simple. We like to keep people in till the end. And the only way that we can do that is giving them the honor to present in a round-table discussion. Apart from that, there was a high demand by some people. They want to participate in a round-table because we don't have keynote speakers. So they consider that as a keynote speaker because there's by invitation, plus of course the paper that they present, some of them if they present. And that helps us without violating our policy. We have to be innovative, we have to find ways that we can accommodate people's needs, academic needs, without violating our basic principles, policies, mission, or whatever you want to call it. But having said that, I've just been around for 5 years now. It worked very well. Some of the discussions were so good, especially when it deals with education and the future of education. Now, one of the criteria of selection, of course, is the country. So you can see we try to include people from different countries. Presumably, they have different experiences. So that's all. Now, the topic here is not so important, the topic per se, but the idea is to find the topic, so around that someone can build his or her presentation. Of course, since this is media and sport, there are some interventions. There's a lot of fake news going around, and but it's not a new thing. It goes back in old times. Everything goes back in old times. But actually, it's much better now than it was 2,000 years ago. Because now people are not so stupid to believe, and if you're stupid, then okay, you deserve to believe in fake news. I remember when I taught in Canada, I was surprised. I was young and a teacher, and I was surprised by a student saying a stupidity. But you don't say to students that it's a stupidity. You say, this is a very good idea, very nice. You should explore it further. You should develop, because it's not politically correct to say to students that you are stupid. So it was a stupid thing. And they say, where did you find this idea? And he said to me very seriously, I heard it. So that was the first surprise. As I said, then it is always good if you test. I said to many people that write to me a lot of emails based upon fake news. Always when you have one approach, you should find the second one, which is in this. So you always should question, and you say, okay, they say this, let's see if the opposite is true as well. And search for the opposite. Then you are safe that you will find another 1,000 fake emails that support exactly the opposite. So that's my views on this thing. I'm writing a paper, hopefully, about fake publications, fake conferences, fake academics, fake professors, fake institutions. And it's very Aristophanes, but I'll send only to John that understands my sense of humor and tell me, Gregory, this is not to be circulated. Because he's honest, so that is with me. And he will say he don't do it. So I based my approach on Aristophanes, and for those that they don't know Aristophanes, they should read it. I'm not going to repeat what he said, but just to make fun of all this. Our first speaker is John Public, who knows him. We're very actually happy that he accepted this figurehead honorable position, a non-paid position, because there's another fake news that if you are being paid and they don't get, and sometimes they get free accommodation, nothing else, because the hotel gives us free accommodation because we can afford it. And this is sometimes we get some free tickets for the cruise, for the night, so we give it to our people. But I think John has done an excellent job helping us with the journal, because that's the most important thing. And I should praise him and thank him because he responds right away. It's very important that people respond right away because we have a pressure from the authors to proceed. And of course, he said whether he, I should say, has dictates, quotation mark, dictates whether a paper should go for outside review. And his most 99% I think what we have done is great success. So the time allocated is 9 minutes 59 seconds. So this is so I'm not going to give you the extra second. So make sure I wrote to you, not all of you, I invite you, say no more than 10 minutes, 9:59. You have 9 minutes 59 seconds to impress the world, John, and we take it, by the way. We're going to make some changes after so we can circulate the fake news. Reduce.
Gregory F. Heisel.
Oli.
I mean that very sincerely, that's not just a fake.
No, I don't give you
I am worried about that 1% though, that apparently not succeed. Well, usually we save our conclusions to the end, but I do a lot of work in storytelling and non-linear storytelling. And in that realm, you can start with the end. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with my conclusion, just so I don't keep you waiting. And then you can think about maybe whether I justify that conclusion. That the problem of fake news and its consequences, I think, is they're only going to get worse before they get better. In particular, because, well, there's a number of forces. The thing I'm focusing on is we are at, I think, a time when we're going to see a rise in immersive forms of media in the years ahead. And as those immersive forms grow in significance, the problems that we see with fake news are going to, we heard about additive effects and interactive effects. Well, this one is, I think, a transformative kind of effect. We're going to see a transformative effect as these things come together to see the emergence of artificial realities that will be very hard to distinguish from whatever it is that we know of as reality, because what we do know of as reality, we only know it through our senses. And if we can fool those senses, well, then we can create very convincing artificial realities. And there may often be little time to vet those. And one of the most important parts of journalism historically has been, you know, some people call it gatekeeping, whatever, but I think it's really about what is vetting of the information that's out there, you know, vetting the truthfulness of things. And as that has become eroded, that function of journalism is eroding. So I want to talk a little bit about some evidence that I could bring to bear on this from a study we've been doing for the last several years in a country that's come up a couple of times today already, Qatar. And we've been doing a project there and comparing some of the developments with its neighboring country, the United Arab Emirates. So this is a study that's funded by the Qatar National Research Fund, and I'm doing it as the lead principal investigator with 3 other principal investigators at a couple of other institutions. One is Northwestern University in Qatar with Dennis, who's the dean and CEO there. Another is Rachel Davis-Mercy, who's a professor at Northwestern in Evanston, their home university location. And then a third with Justin Gengler, who's at Qatar University, which is a university sort of Qatar, not one that has, you know, a base there. And then we're partnering with colleagues in the Emirates. So that's a commercial operation, and it's gotten complicated with the advent of the, whatever you want to call it, the diplomatic break between the Gulf nations, several of the Gulf nations and Qatar. Emirates is one of those that's no longer on speaking terms with Qatar, and that happened in the middle of our project, so it suddenly, that should make collecting data in the Emirates more interesting. So anyway, one of the things we've done is an annual survey. We surveyed approximately 600 people in Qatar every year and approximately 600 people in the Emirates every year. And tracking some things with regard to their use and engagement with mobile media. Those 2 countries, this is a study that came out after we started our study, showed that those 2 countries have the highest internet penetration in the world at over 99%. Pretty much you're required there if you're going to be there. And everybody's connected. And almost everybody does it through their mobile device. In fact, they have one of the highest mobile device penetrations in the world at almost 3 devices per person. So everybody's very connected. And you talk about screen time. And so we've been tracking their mobile connection and use especially what they do in terms of media-related experiences on their mobile. And the thing that I would point to particularly is one of the drivers has to do with the perceived quality of the content. And I think that's something that intersects with the idea of fake news. And one of the reasons that people can be fooled by fake news, even though they may be very knowledgeable and well-informed, is that something looks like it's good quality in terms of the production value. You know, if it's well-designed, if it's got features that make it look like it's authentic or legitimate. And in fact, that's one of the techniques that's been developed, is to make it 90% authentic and then squeeze in a 10% that's fake. And so it's very easy for people then to be fooled. And one of the big consequences of that isn't just what it does for you, the receiver who thinks, oh my gosh, this is true. People immediately, the first thing they do is they share it. And it's like a virus that just goes everywhere instantly. And one of the things we're finding is that even in places like Qatar and the Emirates, where knowledge of, and this was true as of 3 years ago, it's gotten less true over the last 3 years, knowledge of these immersive forms of media was not as high as in some parts of the West. And by immersive, I'm specifically referring to things like augmented reality and virtual reality. Public awareness of those experiences and having actually experienced them was relatively low in those countries. It's been growing over the last 3 years. But more importantly, I think, is interest level in those things is very high. So there's sort of a receptiveness. People are ready for this. They want this kind of experience. And the thing they say they most want to do if they get to experience augmented reality or virtual reality, especially if it's about where they live or relates to where they live in some way, they want to share it. You know, so they're already ready to access this stuff and then to share this stuff, and so the possibility is very high. And along with the time we're doing this study, there have been a lot of tremendous developments technologically in terms of AR and VR and all the related platforms for that. You know, the introduction of these things into the marketplace, if you want to think of it that way, has grown dramatically. People have access through their smartphone to lots of augmented reality content already and other immersive experiences, and relatively low cost. Well, you know, there's still maybe a couple $100 for a VR headset, but you know, for people who can afford a $1,000 phone, there's a lot of social capital in spending $200 more for a wearable device that gives you access to a whole new world of media experiences. And there are also a lot of tools that have emerged in the last couple of years that make it very easy to take whatever form of content we might currently be working with and transform it into something else. And that can be, you know, interactive and immersive and multisensory, but it can also mean using things like tools to create these so-called deep fakes. So you can easily take somebody's picture and then you grab their face, and there are algorithms that can automatically grab your face off of there and then put it on somebody else's body. And then with very little audio of that person speaking, can then make that person's image and video say anything in their voice. And so it can be rendered in a three-dimensional model. It can look extremely real and look to a consumer who might be otherwise relatively sophisticated. But this might look like, well, how could that possibly be fake? So it wouldn't even cross their mind that it's fake. And when they hear this on the eve of, say, an election or some other important thing, they might share that, and it might go, you know, wildly around the community. And with journalism in a very weak position to vet it, to question it, to challenge it, public action might be, you know, dramatically influenced in one way or another. And this may not just be, you know, some individual bored, you know, teenager who's trying to have some fun. This could be designed by people who are deliberately trying to manipulate public opinion, maybe to sow discontent or to manipulate something through very immersive forms of propaganda. So that's where I would leave this in terms of, I think this problem is only going to get worse before it gets better, and it may morph, it may transform into a whole new form of these artificial realities.
Thank you very much. It's the first presentation day to support. We were less than 8 minutes. I don't know if it's the same quality, though, but it's okay. Our second speaker, she's from UK, and she's gonna talk about social media fake news and the UK correction. There was a count today, a release today in UK that put today, I saw it in BBC, and they said that 33% they will not vote for a Brexit, and the next part is 4. So it's very timing to hear what they have to say.
Changes on a daily basis.
On a daily basis. Before or after tea time.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to talk about not that, but social media fake news, particularly Facebook, in its role in play. Some of you might have seen things around us already in the Brexit referendum. I think you probably might be aware of what Brexit is, but just in case you aren't. It was the idea of a referendum so that the UK withdrew from the EU on 23rd of June 2016. It was meant to formally withdraw on 29th of March this year. It's been extended to the 31st of October. I think one of the key things in thinking about the place that fake news, and particularly Facebook, had to play in the whole referendum is looking at what actually happened in terms of voting. So 48% voted to remain in the EU and 52% voted to leave. You can see a map of the UK there, so everyone to the remain has decided to move to Scotland. So Scotland looks like the yellow was largely remain, and then you've got most of England as leave. The interesting thing is the demographics as well. So if you think about Facebook demographics, largely Facebook demographics for those 25s using Facebook less. So you've got the demographics of voting to leave here. So the large proportion of people that really would have been in that demographic are the people that are voting to leave. So Facebook users are quite key in this. Interestingly, and I sound like I'm a fan of the Department for Culture, Media and Sport here because it was in my earlier presentation, but it's just a coincidence. They recently gave out this report which they've been working on, which is a fake news government report from the UK, and it focuses on disinformation and its use, and particularly in political matters. So it focuses a lot of it on the referendum and also Facebook. The really interesting thing about this government report is it has hardly received any media coverage. So it came out fairly recently, well, February of this year, but it wasn't really talked about in the news in the UK, which I thought was quite interesting. And I think it's quite daring in some ways to report on fake news, because it does focus on the politics. But the front covers this image, which you can't see great clear. This is representation from a variety of countries around the world talking about the use of particularly Facebook in politics and the kind of legislation around that. And this front seat here is Mark Zuckerberg's seat because he didn't turn up to any of the interviews or the discussion. So they decided to use that as the front cover of the report, which I thought was pretty daring.
But disinformation, I don't misinformation, disinformation.
It's more or less the same.
The same?
Yeah.
The British way of saying it.
Yeah.
The same, the adjectives that I said in my opening, they change the word.
So one of the things that came out of this report in particular, and it looked at Facebook advertising during the referendum, was the idea of a code of ethics for tech companies, and it should be overseen by an independent regulator. And in particular in UK government, the idea of the electoral reform needed to encompass the idea of fake news and media's role that they might play in elections and things like referendums. So some rules that try and encompass the use of political advertising online, and particularly in relation to Facebook. Some of the other things that came out of research into the idea of Facebook in particular, and its role it played in the Brexit referendum, was the two sides' approach to digital media, and particularly Facebook. So the Leave campaign was much better geared up to use social media, actually. So they even invented their own app you could download, which is called Take Control. And this was really used quite a lot. The people that wanted to leave the EU did download this app. This app would draw lots of the news stories together for people that were interested in it. So they had that. Obviously, it was much more emotional, the Leave campaign. It was bite-sized pieces of fake news, potential statistics, lots of them being questioned, and various things that were very suited to social media. And the amount of money spent from the Leave campaign on particularly advertising on Facebook, many of which is kind of fake statistics and things, is a much higher proportion than the Remain campaign. My personal view on this is that Remain didn't feel the need to actually use those outlets in the way that Leave did. So in example of Facebook groups, there was 4 or 5 very persuasive Leave Facebook groups that were developed. Each had 500,000 people signed up to them. The Remain Facebook page had 1 Facebook page for people to go to. So it really did use Facebook in a different way than things that happened previously. And the kind of things that were retweeted and also went viral on Facebook in terms of some of the advertising that the Department for Culture and Media and Sport have been looking at are things like this. So in Facebook terms, if you're a political advertisement, you have to have the logo on. But actually, what the report from the government found that is not all of the images they collected for their report actually had any official stamp on them, so they could be quite misleading. This is one that the Leave campaign decided on this platform. They decided they needed to target the younger generation. So they decided to spread the idea that there would be quotas on streaming video games and things like that online if you voted basically to Remain. So the EU was going to be forced a quota on the number of hours you could spend playing your video game. It does get funnier actually. There was the obvious ones that lots of them like this, which didn't have, and are quite disturbing, didn't have any official kind of Leave or any party association. With lots of scaremongering about immigration, in particular to the UK. Now this in particular, I think if you probably showed this image to a lot of people in the UK, that went viral hugely across social media. This particular picture was retweeted and it's across Facebook. Not everybody would have seen it obviously on Facebook, and some of the report from the government suggests that people that were considered through their data being mined actually from Facebook, considered to be more vulnerable or persuasive and shown things like this. So for example in my feed, I didn't ever see that picture. People in the town that I come from, in my mum's working class area, they were well aware of this picture because it appeared on their Facebook feed and whatnot. So there was a lot of fake advertising which has actually since been returned to dark advertising. The main thing that again was in the media quite a lot in the run-up to it was this particular figure. So the £350 million, it appeared on the side of buses as well across Facebook. That the idea that the UK would save £350 million that could go directly to the NHS. Politicians who have interviewed in the run-up to the referendum to state this, and this particular image from Facebook went viral as well across the whole of Facebook. There's lots of interesting interviews with the same politicians after the referendum who said actually that's not possible. So the idea you can build a hospital every week, potential money that comes into the EU, once you start to build that obviously is not true. But this was one of the key messages that if you spoke to people that were interested in voting Leave, they would quote things like this at you in particular.
1 minute.
Some of the other more amusing ones are the idea of cups of tea. So again, it's not branded, and again, this one isn't either. But the idea, again, this is from Facebook, the idea of taking away the British cup of tea, for want of better words, the idea that there was actually a remit because there was some EU directive that would talk about banning tea kettles. I don't even actually know what a tea kettle is. I think it's just you get a normal kettle there that does tea and coffee. But anyway, apparently a ban on tea kettles. So there is some very disturbing images that were feeding Facebook in this time. And then there's some more laughable ones. But even actually, if you spoke to particular areas, particular places in the UK, some of these things were actually believed about the tea kettles. I have to tell you, this is an anecdote, and they say you can't use your parents, but my mum was somebody that was talked about the tea kettles, and she was a bit concerned about that. So again, this idea that some of these things are quite ridiculous and wouldn't be believed is not always necessarily true. The other thing that happened across Facebook, and this appears quite prominently in the report, is fake competitions. So these were competitions that were set up to persuade people, and the idea that these clicked on this on Facebook, went along and gave the details, it would mine your data to see if you were in a persuasive group, and then you would potentially be linked up to some of the fake dark advertising that was in the Leave campaign as well. So that's very much underhand. And again, as you probably know about some of the big cases to do with people being prosecuted related to the data mining that went on. Other things, so EU officials apparently go on luxury cruises. This is the important bit, isn't it? It's got limited alcohol as well on cruises. So not just expensive cruises, but with unlimited alcohol. And again, you could click here, and it's unbranded. You can click here to find out more information about why that happened, and you would be taken to a Leave website or one of the many Leave Facebook pages. Finally, a few other things to do with this. I think the important thing really is that although steps have been made by the government to look at this, I think there's small steps. And one of the slightly more, I think, disappointing things is one, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport made an effort to review what went on during the referendum with what's called now dark advertising. And then put a proposal forward. It seems to be a small voice in a very big landscape of fake news and dark advertising that's going on. So my concern that the report itself didn't actually get much coverage itself would be one of those things. There are also some rays of hope. There's some rays of hope in other groups that are working. So this is a more interesting group. Obviously I'm interested in this because it's a mix between politics and art, called Led by Donkeys, in reference to the government. So they go around reposting the social media from Facebook and Twitter of what was said before the referendum and what the situation is now. And some of it's quite funny actually, because they completely contradict themselves. So we have lots of quotes that Theresa May actually posted in the run-up to the referendum, and then you read them from our situation where we are now, and it's quite funny. And some of those things are placed across the UK in a lot of different towns and cities, and projected on the White Cliffs of Dover. In fact, the funniest one I saw was the one that was projected on the White Cliffs of Dover was a politician saying we're a bit reliant on the Cali-Dover crossing. So it's some kind of trade. But yeah, Led by Donkeys is a great group of individuals that are kind of trying to question this idea of the politicians' use of social media.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next speaker on the program, Gerald Steiner. No. Just made it.
Yes, we just made it.
So you have something.
Very good.
You have something to do with the computer.
No, actually, it should already be up there. Let's see if it works.
So we got two people there.
It's the two of us doing.
It's not your presentation, it's the 10 minutes that now we are doing.
Yeah, so it's 20 minutes now. It's a very simple cut.
I know, I know.
Yeah.
It's the 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
We just did it together.
In 10 minutes we are done.
Okay.
Actually, 9 minutes now already.
It's okay, it's possible.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us, and I think it's a great topic. And actually, since we are dealing very much with systems and knowledge, we were asking ourselves, what about the real roots behind fake news? Why is it like that? When did it appear? Is it really related to the internet? What about some basic expectations that we might carry in our inner soul, mind, and body? So that's actually, therefore also we used that two pictures here. So actually 2 examples where fake news was playing a role. So on May 5th in Russia, when we had the accident, but the other one on the right side is also interesting because that's that man in 1835. And why was that done? That was done actually as a kind of a commercial strategy. So the question is, what is it all about? Why do you have fake news? And what to expect actually? No, it doesn't work. Okay, so historical patterns, where to move towards when we think about explicit, implicit attitudes with respect to fake news and so on. So, in the wrong direction. So, a last observation here. I just came back from the Geneva Resource Forum, Expert Resource Forum. Happened last week. So how is that related actually to fake news? It's related to a particular issue, namely the issue of knowing. So another source of fake news might be related to knowing. And very often we talk about peaks, for example, of resources, peak of rock phosphate, for example. We are running out of rock phosphate. So what's the reason behind that? Is it really like to get things done in a specific direction, or is it not knowing? Or is it based in our educational system, or is it based on our universities that we are still very much in the static dimension and not so much in the understanding of dynamic systems? And this is what we propose actually here. So very often fake news is related to not knowing and very much to not having an efficient education, not only in journalism, but also in school in various areas.
Also to the point of not wanting to know because it doesn't fit into the mental model. I just don't want to have it.
Exactly. So what we see here, the last point here, so the knowing and not wanting to know are actually the core issues that we want to focus here. The other ones are covered by our colleagues here. So how is it related actually to kind of misinformation, conspiracy theory and all that. But we focus here mainly on that issue here. So, another thing that is also related to that and also related to is working with extremes. When I go back to this example that we just mentioned with respect to rock phosphate, the issue was we are running out of phosphate. Oh, that's cool. So actually it gave us in science a very big momentum to put more of our effort into that field, because it was like we reached the peak in 25 years. Actually it was then the follow-up action in our group who showed it's more than 500 years. So actually we kind of can be thankful to that kind of fake news to give our research the momentum, but actually it was based on a kind of not sophisticated understanding. It was static. So what's good, what's bad, it depends on the perspective. So and I think this is also not that easy to answer, because it depends on the stakeholders, it depends on the preference profiles. For some it's good, for others it's not good. And then the question is also, what about unconscious elements? And here I would like to stress something, and I thought, what would be nice actually to present here is a kind of a story that is very much exactly going in the direction what we discuss here, namely how we perceive issues, how we perceive events. And this is done actually by a colleague of mine from Harvard. I was at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs. Dan Gilbert is in psychology, and this is going back to his research actually. And when you look, have a look here, what you see, Americans were asked, so US residents were asked, what about the potential cause for death in US population? So with respect to tornado, fireworks, asthma, and drowning. And I ask you, what do you think? What are the core issues? And what's the most influential cause for deaths in US resident population? Any ideas? What do you think, and what do you think the people answered? You tell me.
No. At the end of the day, you take your 10 minutes, then at the end, people will have plenty of time to discuss it.
Good, we can do that. We are now 5 minutes over, and we will take actually altogether 8 minutes. So actually, the estimates were the following. So what people said, what you see here, let's go over it. And here are the actual numbers. But what patterns do we see here? Have a look here at asthma and drowning. So those were totally underrepresented. So people thought that there are much more of influence, and I think, this is something that we should keep in mind. And that's also a core reason why fake news is so powerful, because when we have news where it says, okay, and the boy Xaver died because of asthma. It's not cool. It's not exciting us. There are no emotions in there. It's just like one story among so many others. But drowning, it's also not really a good story. Or say, why to do like a positive message? Why to say, we achieved something at the UN resource panel last week? We also don't get news for that, because why? Is it really that fascinating? No, it's not. So, and the other thing is here, when we look at the extremes of tornado and fireworks, sure, we have not only here, it's not only about fake news, but it's about what we accept and what we expect here. So tornado is something that has a kind of big emotion in it. Firework, it's also a big emotion, but look at the numbers. So the estimates were 564 for tornado. Actually, we had 90 fireworks. There was a lot of documentation on that in media, and we have 6 compared to 160. So just to have that, we want to keep that in your heads. And actually, this was now most recently a quote by Freddie Mercury's father: "Good deeds, good words. Good deeds, thoughts, words, deeds." So what we say here is, it might take a more sophisticated understanding on all sides, on side of society, to better understand media. It might also take extended competencies on the side of media, and actually we have to be aware what competencies are we asking for, because we ask for, okay, competence and education is the big thing, but what about creativity, about critical thinking, reflective thinking, systems thinking, or what is it all about? So with Freddie Mercury, we finish our short presentation, and it's 8 minutes, 30 seconds. Thank you so much for your attention.
When you said you're going to finish. Excellent. John Mark King, 10 minutes to -1 second to read the work. Excellent. Good question. Then, you see how easy it is to manage a professional game? There's not straight answer. Very simple.
Thank you. I live in UAE, and this is some artwork in the Louvre, Abu Dhabi. The government in Abu Dhabi paid $2 billion for the rights to have a museum named the Louvre. They spent about another $1 billion creating it, and it is stunning. And they came, this is one of my pictures. So the next one, please. And so these are, some of the artifacts on display at the Louvre. And the museum had an idea to use guerrilla marketing to generate more interest in the museum. So what they did was they took these two artifacts and made super life-size versions of them and put them along the highway between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. If you go to that picture next. I'm sorry, I didn't do it. And so you're driving along the highway and you see this huge statue of Guanyin, the Bodhisattva of compassion from China, for example. And as you're driving by, it's a brilliant guerrilla marketing scheme. Because as you're driving by, you can turn your radio and you get a 30-second description of each one. There's 11 of these along the road. And as I'm sure you're aware, guerrilla marketing has gained in importance and gained in popularity because of the fact that so many people are avoiding advertising now. We bombarded with 3,000 advertising messages a day minimum. People are tuning them out, and guerrilla marketing is a way to reach people in places where they least expect it and can least avoid it. So this was a brilliant plan, actually. Here's where the fake news part comes in. Al Jazeera Arabic, headquartered in Qatar, and as pointed out earlier, Qatar and UAE have a big political rift going on. It's a serious political rift, actually. So there's a lot of back and forth. Al Jazeera Arabic put out a tweet saying that this was a return to idol worship in the Arabian Peninsula, and that it was against the teaching of Islam, invited comments about the statue. It did not bother to explain that this was a marketing technique at all. So the national newspaper, you go to the last one, ran this editorial. And UAE is very tolerant. I mean, we have Buddhists and Christians. The sheikhs in Dubai and Abu Dhabi actually funded a lot of Christian churches, donated the land for it, donated money to build the churches. The Pope visited Abu Dhabi recently. We don't have synagogues, no. But, we're celebrating a year of tolerance in the country in 2019. Qatar, who is in a big political rift with the UAE and Egypt and Bahrain, it's a state-owned news agency there. They claim to be independent, but it's very much state-owned and operated. Put out this tweet to try to build distrust among people about a religious norm, right? The newspaper, the National, ran this editorial. I'll just read a bit of this. It's a reproduction of a 1,000-year-old artifact currently on display at the Louvre, part of an initiative by the museum to bring the best of the world's cultures to the UAE and to raise awareness of historic artifacts. From Iraq and Lebanon to Egypt and the Gulf, a wide array of communities have traditionally coexisted peacefully. The UAE is home to Muslim, Christian, Hindu, and Buddhist residents, among others. In fact, there's a Hindu temple being built in the UAE now. That's the first. It's going to be a huge complex. So the point here is that what's interesting to me is that it's a media company doing that thing. Media company in conjunction with its government doing disinformation. I would say the difference between misinformation and disinformation is more purposeful. It's done with intent to mislead. I think it's normally a lot of governments. I mean, Ronald Reagan was the king of disinformation. So to me, this is just a really interesting example. And sadly, though, I have to say that there was so much outcry about this that the museum abandoned this whole idea. They took the statues down, and in other words, they capitulated to the thing. That's really disturbing. That's it.
Thank you very much. Very well. Okay, we're going to have time for a nap. Okay, and our next speaker from Mexico, Laura Trujillo Lina.
Yes.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, say it, you know better, so.
Thank you. Hello again. Thank you very much. I'm very happy have been invited to this panel. Thank you very much, Gregory. And I'm going to talk about fake news, our new reality. I will begin this presentation with one of the multiple stories from the earthquake lived in Mexico City 2 years ago, the story of Frida Sofia, age 12. The story captivated a country still relying from catastrophe. Rescue workers were laboring from the clock to free a 12-year-old girl who had miraculously survived Mexico's devastating earthquake, but remained trapped in the ruins of her school. Television channels broadcast breathless updates, describing how the rescuers were inching closer to the cavity where Frida Sofia was buried alive. Naval officers leading the rescue effort told reporters that she had been seen to wiggle her fingers, that she had taken shelter under a granite table and was in contact with schoolmates. However, on Thursday, hope turned to anger as the story fell apart. There was no student named Frida Sofia. There was no girl trapped in the ruins of Enrique Repsamen School. During the rescue, soldiers and marines with specialized equipment, such as heat sensors and sensitive microphones, searched the school site for signs of life and claimed to have found Frida Sofia. Rescue workers were said to be feeding her meal down plastic jugs. However, discrepancies started to emerge. No distraught Frida family members came to the school. None of the surviving staff or students knew anyone with that name. This story makes us think about the fake news. In this example, we can see how the uses of the language can confuse us and create actions, emotions, hopes, and mistakes. It is also possible to make some questions about this. Is the truth worthy, or are fake news better and then useful? Or if we would want a philosophical approach, is the language important, or what is the function of language? And finally, does the communication imply honesty? To answer those questions, and because we are in Greece, I would like to use the theory of Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers of antiquity, as you know, and because we are in a communication symposium, I will speak about the theory of language of Neil Postman, an American critic and educator. They were both concerned about the uses of language and its purpose. In the first place, Aristotle pointed out that communication was one of the primary differences between humans and animals, because we use the language and the animals don't have this kind of system. They communicate through sounds. I have to clarify what is the language, and I have found a very good definition of it. Language is a set of signs which are related to certain rational relations and values like good, evil, just, and unjust, for example. Those characteristics make men have a responsibility for the use of language, and this makes the community possible. Until now, we have answered some of the questions we asked before. It is also important to say that it is necessary for the language to be useful, because its purpose is to communicate. There is no sense in words which cannot mean anything, or if they are fake, they wouldn't understand each other. Any message, the reality. We would live in a lie. Jaron Lanier, a computer scientist, from Silicon Valley and virtual reality concept inventor sustains, quote, "It looks like the idea of truth has died and the killers are the social networks," end of quote. Today, we don't speak about the truth because we don't have the pleasure to know it. We talk about the fake news because they are surrounding our internet world. Neil Postman defined fake news as stupid talk. Quote, "Stupidity is words. It is not something people possess as a kidneys. Stupidity is something we speak, sentences that do not make sense," end of quote. And I will say that most of the time, fake news doesn't make sense. We decide to buy a product